Hey guys, real quick before I start with today's video, I want to share something with you guys. I am doing my very first giveaway. Now, as many of you guys know, I have a website called ParadiseAviaryExotics.com, and on that website, I sell a variety of different things, whether it's birds, feeding supplies, medications, breeding supplies, you name it, it's probably there. For everybody in the month of June that purchases something from that website, you will be entered to win a free pair of birds. And for the month of June, the birds that I am giving away are orange cheek waxbills. Go to the description box of this video. There you're going to see a link that will lead you to my Facebook page where there is a set of rules of who and how you can enter into this giveaway. All right, now without any further ado, let's jump straight into today's video.
I think that one of the most frustrating things that can happen to you in this hobby is having a pair of birds that just doesn't want to breed for you. And it's even more so frustrating when you're new to the hobby, when you're a newcomer, when you just start and this is your very first pair of birds. Why? Because I can't think of a time when you're going to be more excited for a pair of birds breeding for you than that very first pair that you acquire. It's something that's magical, and this is something that's either going to make you as a breeder or it's going to break you. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are broken by pairs of birds that just don't want to breed for them, and they don't know exactly what to do. So in today's video, I'm going to give you a clear list of 8 very specific things that you, as a newcomer to the hobby, need to do in order to make sure that your pair of birds breed for you. For those that don't know me, my name is Renzo, and I have been working with finches for the last 15 years. Everything from African, Australian, and Asian species, you name them, I've probably had them and I've bred them. And we're going to start off with the very first thing on the list, which is making sure that you have a true pair. Now, I know that this sounds extremely obvious to many of you, but for those that don't know, birds come in 2 distinctive forms. They're either going to be dimorphic or they're going to be monomorphic. The species that are dimorphic, they're very easy to tell the difference between the males and the females. Why? Because you can see it. It's obvious. The males are very bright in color, and usually the females are going to be duller in color in some species. In other species, the color pattern changes where the males are just slightly brighter than the females, but at the end of the day, they have some form of distinctions between males and females, and it makes it easy for you to tell whether you have a pair or not. But there are those species that are monomorphic, meaning both the males and the females are similar. And if you end up with one of these types of finches for your very first pair, chances are you might have a hard time because you have a 50-50 shot at ending up with a true pair or ending up with 2 males or 2 females. So when you have something like this, it's very important for you to realize how to distinguish the difference between males and females. And if you don't know how to do that, I have plenty of other videos in the past where I've talked about monomorphic species and how to distinguish between some of those sexes. If you're not sure if you have a pair or not, chances are that it's going to be a whole lot harder for you to be able to hatch chicks. So confirming that you have a true pair is the very first step on the list. The second step on this list is the age of the birds. Now, I know that it can be a little bit tricky or difficult sometimes to know the age of the birds that you have, especially if you just go to a bird show and you pick out a pair of birds from a cage. Sometimes you don't know how old they are. The person that's selling them could be a broker. If they're not a breeder, they're not going to know the age of the birds. Even if they are a breeder and they don't have good record keeping, they might not be able to tell you exactly how old these birds are. Or if they're not honest. Let me tell you, when I first got into this hobby, there was plenty of times when I would go to the bird show and I would see birds that I wanted, and just like anybody else, I would ask, how old are the birds? I wanted to make sure that I was getting young birds because success in this hobby comes when you have young pairs. The last thing that you want to do is buy an old pair of birds. Usually old birds are burnt out. So chances are if you end up with an old pair, they may not breed, or they may only lay 1 or 2 eggs. The male might not be fertile, so he may not fertilize the eggs. The female will just lay eggs that are not fertile, and so on. So the age is very important. So I would ask these brokers, sometimes breeders that would be at the show, how old are the birds? And I would see that some of these birds had the tail bent. So their tail would be bent towards one side or the other. And I was young into this hobby, probably about a year in, and they would tell me, oh, that's a young bird. It just fledged the nest, a while back. That's why the tail's bent like this and that. And at the moment, it made sense. I'm like, okay, when they're in the nest, the tail bends. It's normal. Okay, it makes sense. It's a young bird. Take it home. Come to find out eventually that this was either an old male or an old female, and the reason why the tail was bent was because this bird was just taken out of breeding production. It was one of the breeders that they would have breeding for them. The bird's burnt out, it wasn't doing much, and that's why the tail was bent, because it was a bird that was recently on top of eggs and so on. So knowing the age of the birds is very important. If the bird is too old, chances are you're not going to have success with them. If the bird is too young, chances are you're not going to have success with them also. Most of these finch species have to be at least 1 year old in order for them to be successful at mating and giving you chicks. And even then, that's not guaranteed. Some species, like the parrot finches, tend to be a little bit quicker. I've had male parrot finches that are good to go as early as 8 months old. But for the females, you always want to make sure that they're at least 1 year or older before you put them into your breeding program. This is gonna avoid a lot of problems for you in the future. Number one, if the hen is too young, she could become egg-bound and die very quickly during the first time that they start to lay. And this is very common for some species like owl finches and star finches, maskgrass finches, and so on. The very first time that they start to lay, it's probably one of the most dangerous times for a hen. So you want to make sure that your hen is of age. How do you know she's of age? Well, that's when buying from the proper people comes into place. You always want to try to buy from a breeder that knows the age of the bird. Let's go on to number 3. We're making progress here. Little by little, you're gonna start to learn, you're gonna know how to breed by the end of this video. So at number 3, the thing that we're gonna do is focus on the time of the year. What time of the year is it? Some birds breed during the spring, some birds breed during the fall. This is where you have to kind of know a little bit more about the species that you're working with. For African and Australian species here at Paradise Aviary, I like to start in September. Now, granted, I'm in Florida. There are other places up north that, depending on the winter, how cold it may get, you may start your breeding at different times. But as far as me here, Florida, I start in September, I finish in April. And that's when I breed my Africans, my Australians, and some of the Asiatic species. Now for some other species like the pin-tailed whitas and the weavers, these guys will breed during the spring. This is usually the time of the year when they're gonna start getting that breeding plumage, and that will be the time of the year when they breed. So you have to know what time of the year to breed these birds. If you don't, you can't expect to have chicks, or you can't expect them to start laying when you want them to. You need to wait for the right time of the year in order to have success with these birds. All right, now moving on to number 4 on this list, we're gonna have nutrition. And nutrition is probably, in my opinion, one of the most important things on this list, other than number 1, which was making sure that you have a true pair. Obviously, if you don't have a true pair, you're never gonna have any chicks or eggs. But nutrition is very important. I would say that this is one of the most important parts of keeping and breeding finches, especially when you start to get into some of the harder to breed species like the Africans, for example. But regardless of what species of finch you are breeding, one of the most important things that I feel like young breeders in this hobby miss when they first get into this hobby is offering their birds the right seed mixes. Now, unfortunately, the majority of the seeds that I see being sold, especially here in the US, because I can't talk for Europe, I've seen European seeds and some of the mixes that they have over there, unbelievable. It's amazing the different types of mixes and the quality of these mixes that are available for European breeders. And I think that it's one of the reasons why they have such a higher success rate at hatching all these hard to find species, and they're so much more advanced in aviculture than we are, because the nutrition that they have and the companies working towards establishing better nutrition for these birds, it's just unbelievable. It's out of this world. While here in the US, the majority of the seed mixes that we see are filled with white millet. White millet is probably the worst thing that you can offer your birds year round. And the majority of the mixes that I see, and I'm not gonna name brands because I don't wanna put any of these brands on blast, but they sell you the seeds that are cheap. It's the only reason why you're able to buy these seeds at a cheaper price. And unfortunately, quality is often overlooked in order to offer a product that's cheaper. And your birds are not gonna do well on a cheap mix. That is why so many of these species like parrot finches, Gouldians, and these other finch species will breed for you in a cage on these lower quality seeds, but more often than not, they end up getting fat. You can't meet their nutritional expectations, so they end up tossing the chicks, and you have so many problems because of these lower quality seed mixes that you are offering. One of the most important things to remember when breeding is that you need a minimum of at least 2 different types of seed mixes. You need a breeding mix and you need a maintenance mix. And that is the reason why I have Paradise Aviary's breeding finch mix, and then I have Paradise Aviary's maintenance mix. Now what you do with these 2 mixes is you offer it at different times of the year. So when you do this, you kind of emulate what happens in the wild with these birds, and it helps the birds know to either start or stop their breeding season. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people, even though when they try to breed birds during the breeding season, they have a male and they have a female, they sit there and they go, well, I don't know what's happening. My birds are not, the male's not building a nest. He's not courting the female's not laying eggs. Nothing's happening. My birds don't want to breed. Well, it could be because you just haven't stimulated them enough in order to get them into that breeding condition. Now, seed mixes are just one part of the nutrition when it comes to finches. Obviously, when it comes to nutrition, I can sit here and make a 1 hour long video, or probably even longer, talking about the different types of things that you can offer your bird. But just keep in mind that at least a minimum of 2 seed mixes. You also need some form of egg food, which this is going to help bring that protein content level higher to stimulate your birds to get into breeding condition. I offer 2 different types of proteins for when it comes to egg food: normal egg food, and then the insectivore egg food, which has a variety of different insects or freeze-dried insects that are going to be good at stimulating some of these harder to breed species, like the Africans, for example, that require some insect in their diet in order to feed their chicks successfully. Along with that, you can also incorporate some sprouted seeds, which are probably one of my favorite ways of bringing my birds into breeding condition. When you compare sprouted seeds to egg food, I would say that sprouted seeds are 100 times more important. Why is that? Because sprouted seeds are not going to make the birds fat. Egg food, you run the risk of overfeeding, and if you do overfeed, your male or your female can become obese, and if they become obese, then that's going to affect fertility. So one way of going around that is you give sprouted seeds, and that's generally what I like to do at the beginning of the breeding season to bring them into condition. And little by little, the nutrient content of those sprouted seeds being a whole lot higher than the normal seeds will bring these birds into breeding condition. As long as your nutrition's on point, then you're on your way to being successful at breeding these birds. Moving on to step number 5 on this list, which is going to be light hours. Now, a lot of people take light hours for granted. Listen, you can't keep these birds in a dark room or a place where they're not getting proper lighting and expect them to breed for you. These birds are stimulated to breed depending on the amount of light hours that come in through their eyes. In the wild, these birds would wake up very early in the morning when the sun comes up, and then they would go to sleep very late in the evening when the sun goes down. And usually during these days, you're getting about 13 to 14 hours of daylight, depending on the time of the year. Usually during the breeding season, the light hours are longer, and that is one of the reasons why they're also stimulated to start breeding. So here, what I like to do is the lights in the outdoor aviary turn on, in the outdoor aviary and in the bird room, they turn on at 7 in the morning. And those lights don't shut off till 8 o'clock at night. So they get around 13 hours of light. You have to be very careful when it comes to light hours. You don't want to overdo it, because if you give them too much light hours also, it can bring your birds into molt. I've noticed that sometimes I've gone as much as 14 hours and it's been okay, but you have to be careful. If you start to get into that 15-hour mark or more, you can get birds to start molting, and that is something that happens very often with, for example, parrot finches. If they get too many light hours, you're going to have these birds that it almost seems like every month are molting, and they never lay fertile eggs. So you have to be very careful with the amount that you give them. Too much is bad, too little is also bad. I have found that the sweet spot for me and the variety of birds that I have, since I have a large variety of different species, so it's hard sometimes to know, because some species might be good at breeding with only 11 hours while some of them may need the full 13. So I found that that sweet spot right there of about 12 to 13 hours is perfect, and it gets all of the species that I have to come into condition and breed properly. Moving on to step number 6 on the list, we have cage size or the enclosure that you are keeping your birds in. Now this one, it's kind of tricky. It's important, but I wouldn't say that it's too important, because I've seen videos online of people who breed birds in these super tiny cages, man, and they have chicks. They breed without any issues. And I've gone to some breeders' houses where they have, you know, those cages, like the same ones that I have in the bird room, where it's the full cage and it has a divider in the middle, and it's like 14 inches on this side, 14 inches on this side, and they'll have a pair on the left and a pair on the right, and both of the pairs are breeding, and both of the pairs have chicks in the nest. So I don't think that in the enclosure size is all that important in order to get them to breed, because some of these birds, as long as they have the right light hours and the right nutrition, they will breed anywhere, regardless of the cage size. But the cage size is important for some species. Why? Because some species are prone to becoming obese. Obviously, you want to try to offer your birds as much room as possible. The more room that the bird has flying back and forth, the stronger that bird's going to be, especially for the females. You want to make sure that the females are able to develop their flight muscles, because those flight muscles, the more developed that they are and the more flight that they get, the least likely that you're going to have problems with them becoming egg-bound. So if you want to have a successful breeding season where you're not losing hens, you have healthy birds, and you're able to have a higher success rate, well, the only way of getting into that is by offering them the right conditions. So even though enclosure size can sometimes not be the most important things, and you can place them into smaller cages, it's not recommended. I highly recommend that you give your birds as much room as possible to make sure that they develop properly. Also keeping in mind that if you have them in one of those small little cages and you have 2 birds that barely fit there already, and they have a clutch of 4, when those chicks fledge, they're barely going to have any space to fly. And these chicks, they also need to develop their chest muscles and their flight muscles and so on. And the only way that they're going to get that is by being in a cage that is an adequate size for them. Personally, I would say that the smallest cage I would breed in is going to be the 24 by 16 by 16. That is a standard size cage that I breed most, if not all, of my Australian species. And those cages are perfect. They're perfect. I can't complain, because it's plenty of room for 1 pair of finches. They have plenty of space to fly back and forth. And then when you have a clutch of 4 to 6, all those chicks are able to fledge. They're able to have enough space in there with the parents. And eventually, once they're winged, you're able to grab them and throw them into a bigger flight, just so that these birds are able to develop a little bit healthier and better. That's a clue also, or a tip that I can give you. I've noticed that the chicks that I pull from these cages at an early age, once they're winged, I throw them into flights. Birds that develop or grow up in flights tend to be bigger. They're more robust than birds that grow up in smaller cages. They're stronger, they're healthier. So if you're able to do that, go ahead, and it's going to make your breeding season a whole lot better as well. And we're almost coming to an end. One more after this. So tip number 7 is, and it seems like an obvious one, but good husbandry. Make sure that you are keeping your aviary clean. Now, I know it's not rocket science, but a lot of people, man, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a breeder's house and I look at their trays, and the trays are just like, they're filled with poop to the top, or seeds. You know, the bottom of the cages, there's like a mountain of poop underneath the perch. Guys, keep your aviaries clean. If you have good husbandry in your aviary, if you keep everything clean, chances are you're going to have a better breeding season. Your birds are not going to get as sick as other ones. Diseases are not going to spread. Just overall, the health of everything is going to look better. With my bird room, I can't count how many times I've posted videos of the bird room and somebody sees it and they're like, oh, that's so clinical. It looks like a hospital. Oh my God, this and that. There's a reason why I have it like that. There's a reason why everything is so simple and clean, and I'm not adding like little trees and fake stuff inside of the cages. Look, I know it would look 1,000 times better if every single one of the cages that I have in there had some shrubbery and bushes and this and that inside. Yes, it's gonna look great. But at the end of the day, it's just more stuff to clean, and the poop is just gonna build up on top of all that stuff. One of the things that I do is after the breeding season is over, during the resting time of the year, they don't spend it in those cages. I grab the birds and I put them in flights or in the outdoor aviary. So they're not in there year round. And it gives me the opportunity of, like I said, just keeping the cages clean, just two perches, the nest, and nothing else inside. The cleaner I keep it, the less of a chance of some disease or infection spreading from one side to the other, because it's more work, it's more stuff to clean. So remember, good husbandry, keep your cages clean, keep the trays clean. I do my cleanings, I want to say it's every single Saturday or every single Sunday is when I go through all the trays, clean all the trays, pull the paper, etc., etc. And this allows me to make sure that everything in the aviary is clean and the birds stay healthy. All right, guys, now we made it to the end of the list. Step number 8, or the last thing on our list, is to educate yourself on the species that you're working with. There are so many different species, and each one of these species has probably their own requirements. So you have to educate yourself on the species that you're working with. You can't just be a breeder that has had success, for example, with zebra finches and societies, and all of a sudden get a pair of green singers and think that you're going to be successful at them when you replicate the same exact thing. For example, societies and zebras, they'll breed in closed nest boxes, but green singers are not going to go into a closed nest box to breed. They need an open style nest. So this is why you have to educate yourself on the species that you're working with. Some species, like for example, the Peter twin spots, do not like to nest up high. They build their own nest on the floor of the cage or on the floor of the aviary. So if you're putting a nest box up high, chances are these birds are never going to breed for you. They're never going to start building a nest for you. And you're not going to know this unless you read and educate yourself on the species that you're trying to breed. You can't expect to have success with something that you don't know. You can't just throw a pair of birds in a cage and cross your fingers and hope that eventually they'll give you chicks. So make sure that you educate yourself on these species in order to be successful with them. All right, guys, well, that's going to be the end of the video. I know that I ran through these pretty quick. I didn't want to make this video too long. These are just a simple step-by-step guide on 8 different things to look for when you're breeding birds in order to make sure that you're successful. Make sure that you have a true pair. Try to find out the age of the birds. Make sure that you are in the right time of the year in order to get these birds to breed. Make sure that you are offering the proper nutrition, the proper light hours, the right enclosure, the right size cages. Make sure that you have good husbandry, and most important of all, educate yourself on the species that you are working with. And if you follow all 8 of these rules, then you are on your way to breeding birds. So hopefully this video is helpful. If it is, remember to hit a thumbs up, like, subscribe, and we'll see each other in the next one. Bye.